Objective morality. Let's first imagine, to give you an example, we have a Nazi officer who is responsible for the killings of Jews. Is he morally correct? From a subjective standpoint, yes, he is morally correct. From an objective standpoint, most likely not, or most certainly not. And you can already feel the first conundrum we have here in this first example. And this is something what I would like to discuss with you today, the comparison between, or the difference between subjective and objective morality, or the question that I've posed today, which is there objective morality even to begin with? And I think before that we proceed onto the question or onto the subject, I think it's always important to first define what is morality, or simply for every subject, what is the definition of that subject. And ultimately, I guess most people already know what morality is. Morality is basically a set of principles of right and wrong, good and bad behavior in our society, because ultimately without morality we would be very cannibalistic, we would be very wild and tribal and very hostile towards each other, and that's why we need morality imposed upon us in order to regulate our emotions, in order to control us in some way, shape or form, so that we do not commit any heinous crimes or any forms of violence, and so on and so forth. I think that is very obvious. Just to have a definition here, and I think the complexity lies in the fact that it becomes sometimes necessary to lie or to go through certain justifications and sacrifices and so on and so forth. And especially lying is one subject that concerns morality a lot, because sometimes we are morally required to lie. Sometimes it is also necessary to lie in order to get something that we want. And obviously there are certain or various degrees of lies, just as there are certain degrees of truth and with everything else. And this is where the whole complexity lies, meaning that sometimes a person might interpret morality differently, and this is how many people go through life, because we are very different people. We are all individuals with our own views of this world, and sometimes we do not abide to the objective morality, and especially for people who do not align with a certain religion, because religion is ultimately there to give you guidance, to give you moral guidance, and to give you some set of rules and ideas how to live life in the best way possible. And you have obviously Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and other religions that are kind of all in the same, let's say, pool, because they all have kind of the same objective of morality. Now that's not objective morality, but that's the objective of morality. So I think objective morality is ultimately, again, the definition of objective morality is a universal belief that morality is something universal and that is not up for interpretation. So meaning that you cannot bend or flex morality in any way, shape or form, that it is already a given law of nature. So for example, we can give the 10 commandments of Christianity, or the 10 commandments of Moses, let's say. Or we can say any, like, for the most basic example, killing is not morally correct, or stealing is not morally correct, pursuing adultery is not morally correct, and so on and so forth. Those kind of examples are perhaps universal, that should not be committed by anyone, regardless of your religion, of your upbringing, of your culture, and so on. And I think most cultures already have that. Now, I'm not going to analyze every single culture here. I'm not going to analyze Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and so on. But I think you kind of get the gist and the point of it, that every religion, every culture, every society has kind of a similar set of moral principles. And this is something what we would call objective morality. Objective morality is something that we all universally abide to. And to give you the same example that I brought up just in the beginning of this podcast or this video with the Nazi officer, which is that if it's morally correct to kill Jews as a German officer, as a Nazi officer, the subjective moralists, now we have the subjective moralists and the objective moralists here, so there's two kinds of moralists. And from the subjective moralist standpoint, it is morally correct because it is in his opinion or in his worldview morally correct, because the subjective moralists, they claim that we have our own morality and morality continuously evolves. Now, this is a very, let's say, a risky take on that, honestly speaking, because I'm not too fond on subjective morality. I certainly believe that if you were actually to pursue subjective morality, that would mean that you would basically live on your own completely, and you would pursue things that would not be seen as morally correct by most people, because, let's say, quite frankly, the entire world or most of society in this world operates under the objective moral principle guidance, let's say. And if you were to pursue subjective morality, that would mean that you would define what morality is. And ultimately, who are you to decide what morality is? Now, you can argue from an objective standpoint, or from an objective morality standpoint, that, well, who wrote the Bible? Are those the judges? Are those the people who are in charge of our morality? Well, I'm not going to get too deep into religion and why, all these things, but just to give you a brief notion of that, religion is there to guide us, to make us feel that we are not gods, that ultimately we have someone up there who is God, and you're not God, and you're not God, and you're not God. Religion is there, or Christianity, let's say, for my example, Christianity is not there to define who becomes God, because we already have God, and we have Jesus Christ. And it's kind of this, let's say, the Konrad Lorenz example of the banana and the monkey experiment, which I think I've mentioned once in one of my podcasts. It was in the Freedom podcast, if I remember correctly. But you can search it up if you want. I'm not going to get into that detail. Religion is simply there to humble us, and it is there to make sure that nobody goes above the law and nobody goes above God, ultimately. This is the objective moral claim, or the standpoint, as I see. If you were to pursue subjective morality, that kind of reminds me of Friedrich Nietzsche and his Zarathustra work. And this is also something that I wrote in my first book, and as well as my second book. You can search it up. I have the links in the description down below. And with Friedrich Nietzsche, it was very interesting that ultimately, for those of you who didn't read the book Zarathustra, it was basically about the fact that we have to create our own morals or our own values. And that is because we killed God. We killed God in the 19th century, beginning 20th century, with the emergence of communism and all the other totalitarian ideologies. And because we lost God, we have to kind of replace the values afterwards, because we can't just live in a valueless society. We cannot just have zero values. We need some kind of moral guidance. We need some kind of approach to life, let's say. And because of that, he believed, or he assumed, that we have to create our own values, which means that we become our own gods. And this is a very dangerous approach, and this is exactly what happened in the 20th century ultimately, which is that communism came into play, fascism came into play. Those two ideologies were perhaps the biggest ones, or were the only two biggest ones, let's say. And especially with communism, you clearly saw, because Nazism only existed for 12 years, from 33 to 45, but communism was a much better experimented totalitarian ideology. And we saw clearly what happens when you remove God, when you actually implement atheism. You have the moral principles under Joseph Stalin, under Mao Zedong, and all the other communist leaders who created their own moral principles and saw as they wanted, basically, and decided what was morally correct and what was morally incorrect. And the notion that the subjective moralists claim that somehow morality evolves, I mean, maybe in some occasion, but you can perhaps help me out here, because I don't remember a time where morality kind of evolved in some way, shape, or form. So, for example, killing was always seen as morally incorrect. And I don't know how that can evolve into being correct. But maybe what they mean by morally evolving is that sometimes we see... So for example, women in the past were always seen as simply being home bakers and being at home, stay-at-home moms, and kids, church, and kitchen, basically, nothing more. Now our morality has changed, or our stance on that has changed, and we allowed, or we kind of became easier on women, and we allowed women to actually join the workforce, to pursue a career, and so on and so forth. So maybe in that sense, maybe yes, morality did evolve in some way, but that is more of a cultural change rather than a moral change. A little bit, but you can surely debate that, and you can surely argue as much as you want. I believe what they actually mean is that somehow the moral principles that were ingrained in us, that somehow it became different. And this is exactly where I disagree with, because the proponents of objective morality, or the objective moralists, they claim that our moral principles are already ingrained in our human nature and our law of nature, let's say, and that like the moment we are born, we already have some senses of how we should operate morally in this world. But this is also kind of a risky take on that, and I wouldn't necessarily be too fond of that notion, because I believe that ultimately people are very flexible and very elastic, and they can be brought up in a very particular way, because as you see, many people are not the same. We're all different people. We have different cultures, we have different religions, and that will always remain like that forever. We are not the same. We are not universal. We are different. In every culture, there's a different code, a different codex. And so I believe that, yes, morality is essentially ingrained in our human nature, but the question, which types of moral principles, that is already up to culture and religion and the upbringing of you, of your life, of your childhood, that ultimately decides what kind of moral principles you will follow and pursue. And going back to the whole subjective morality statement and Friedrich Nietzsche, this is exactly what happened in the 20th century then. And what happened exactly was that the leaders saw themselves as gods, and they decided what was morally correct and not correct. And this is the result that we had. Now, again, you can argue with Christianity and Islam, and you can argue with all the other religions that, well, we pursued the crusades, that we fought other religions, and the fact that we were violent and brutal, and we wanted to impose Christianity upon other people. Yeah, I'm not denying that 100%, and that is also not correct. But I'm not talking about the people who were in charge of Christianity at the time. I'm talking about, from a fundamental standpoint, the moral principles that are enshrined in our Bible, in our human nature. And it is much better to have a society that believes in God rather than a society that is full of atheist people and people who do not know too much about morality and too much about values. And actually, I've had for a very long time arguments with atheists. And, one thing that really fascinated me is that they really take a lot of energy and willpower to actually believe in the fact that God does not exist. If you could only take that much energy and put it into the belief in God, your life would probably be much better and much less miserable than you are now. And I know I sound a little bit harsh on the atheist, but I really cannot fathom the idea that you really don't believe in anything. Then what do you believe in ultimately? Because you need to believe in some kind of spirit, or you need to believe in some kind of moral principle and some kind of codex. And besides, where do you get your morals from? This is my first question that I have, because as far as I remember, religion is there to serve morality, and religion is there to teach you some kind of guidance in life. Because outside of that, because ultimately morality bases itself on the principle of the Bible or Quran or any other religious scripture that you follow. And it is very interesting to me where the people get their morality from an atheist standpoint. And to conclude the whole objective morality and subjective morality conundrum argument, look, ultimately, it's going to be unanswered for the rest of our lives. We're never going to be fully 100% correct in our analysis, correct or incorrect. And this will always remain something up for debate. But if you were to ask me which side I were to side on, because I ultimately don't really like siding with people or siding with ideas too much, like, either this or that kind of, because I do see both sides. But if I were really to to pick a side, I would definitely side with the objective moralist, because at least I know that there's nobody from a human standpoint who is going to be there to judge me, because I don't want another human, like another man, there being a moral police or some kind of moral God telling me what is correct and what is not correct. I'd rather have some kind of divine scripture, some kind of God, some kind of Bible tell me those are the commandments and those are the things that you should follow and not follow. Those are the things that are good or bad. And besides, I think ultimately we have our own intuitive feelings, we have our own intuition, and we know what feels right and what feels wrong. And we can already kind of, let's say, tell what is morally correct and what is not morally correct. But the Bible is certainly there to give you some kind of cohesive moral guidance, regardless of what your beliefs are or, you know, what your intuition says. So yeah, this is a very heated topic, a very heated debate, but that's exactly what I love to do. And if you have any certain arguments or points to make, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. Make sure you subscribe for more videos like those. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.